What is up, everybody? Today we're doing a Whole Cake Island review. So last week I actually did my review of the Dressrosa arc, and I talked about how it was one of my favorite arcs so far in all of One Piece. I gave it a 9.5 out of 10. So coming into Whole Cake Island, I had some high expectations just because I thought Dressrosa was so good, and even though in between Dressrosa and kind of the Summit War saga you get, Punk Hazard and Fishman Island, it felt like the last two big arcs in One Piece were maybe two of my favorites. And so that meant that Whole Cake Island had a lot to live up to. But right away, I think everything that it does with Sanji is just incredible. I like when after they leave Dressrosa and they get to Zao, and I like the kind of mystery and the retelling of what had happened to Sanji and Nami, Chopper and Brook after they had split up and they left Dressrosa and they ran into Big Mom's pirates. And that was one of my criticisms of Dressrosa. I was kind of angry that I didn't get to see more Sanji because, spoiler alert, Sanji is actually my favorite character in the entire series. I am obsessed with Sanji, and so this arc seems like it was perfect for me because Sanji is just so awesome, and I love everything that they did with his backstory. The fact that Sanji is part of the Vinsmoke family and that he has this whole other portion to his backstory other than when he's stranded on the island way back in the day without any food. But previously to that, he was this prince, he was this king, but he actually just got beaten up by all of his brothers, and his dad kind of just got rid of him as a kid. And that backstory, I think it builds on Sanji as a character really well and added to him as a character, and I think it opens up the door for other Straw Hats like Zoro and potentially like Frankie and Usopp, maybe some other people who have more to their backstory than what we originally thought. And his backstory is also just so sad. The fact that that he is a human being. When I first read that, I was like, are they gonna make Sanji like an artificial human? I was like, I do not want that to happen. But that was only for a little bit of time, and they reveal that Sanji is in fact a human, while all of his other brothers are not. They're artificially made, and that's why they're so much stronger than him. And it makes sense. It's kind of this weird thing when you look back on it. It's like the brothers had no emotion. This is just so normal to them, and they would not act any other way to Sanji. But Sanji, of course, takes this big beating as a kid and is just kind of cast aside because he's a real human being while his brothers aren't. And I really liked that backstory, and it leads to one of the saddest and most heartbreaking moments so far in the series, when Sanji goes to give food to Pudding and then finds out everything about the assassination plan, and that Sanji has kind of been led astray. He has this one hope. Sanji has one hope that him and Pudding can be happy, and he'll live out the rest of his life. He'll abandon his crew. He'll do all of these things and sacrifice everything he holds dear. And at least he has this one glimmer of hope in Pudding, and it's just Dash. And that's one of the most sad moments literally in the entire series, very reminiscent of early Water 7 with Usopp and Robin and kind of everything that happens with them at the beginning of the Water 7 saga. And that moment, that's probably the image of Sanji crying in the rain is probably one of my favorite panels in the entire series. Even though it's so subtle, it's such a little thing, it's not an action scene, but that panel hit me so hard, and I've literally caught myself just flipping back to that page and just staring at that panel, for going back, even when I'm reading the fight between Luffy and Katakuri. That image has just been seared into my brain. It is unreal the emotion that Oda was able to put behind Sanji, definitely reaffirming that Sanji is just my favorite Straw Hat by far, to be honest. Like, I love the Straw Hats, and that shows how well Sanji was done. And another cool thing that I just kind of kept thinking about when I was reading Whole Cake Island is that, like, Whole Cake Island, the irony of having Sanji be there. I'm sure this has been talked about before, but obviously a huge part of Sanji's backstory, his original backstory, is that he, starved to death almost, and that the cook, and I can't remember the cook's name, his real dad basically, eats his leg to help Sanji survive. And yet at Whole Cake Island, everything about the setting you can eat, so no one could ever go starving. They have an abundance of food there. So placing Sanji's second backstory at Whole Cake Island is just like another added layer to the depth of his character and to like the tightly woven story that Whole Cake Island really becomes. And yeah, I can't really talk more about Sanji because he's amazing. I loved everything that they did with his character, with this second backstory with him and the Vinsmoke family. And I am definitely planning on making a full-fledged video essay on why Sanji is my favorite character. So that'll be coming out in the next, maybe month or so. I really want to give that video time to breathe because I want to do Sanji justice. But be on the lookout for that. But yeah, this did a lot for Sanji's backstory, and having that emotional thread and hitting some of the peaks of emotion at the start of the arc, again, it really goes a long way for making the arc digestible because they're introducing so much that you have this thread right away that gets you engaged, and is honestly the highlight of the arc for me is everything with Sanji right at that moment. And you also have Sanji beating up Luffy that I'll talk about a little bit later, and the slap of Nami to Sanji. You have that moment of like Luffy and Nami are really the two characters, the two crewmates that Sanji has the deepest connection to, I would say. And so having him kind of fight Luffy was just devastating, and seeing Nami slap him like that was just, it was heartbreaking, but really reinforces the end of the arc. And then going into kind of the big overview of the arc, you have Big Mom. And I think Big Mom is really interesting as a character. It's kind of the first emperor that we're really, out of the four emperors right now, we're really diving into, their land, their territory. I really liked the hierarchy of Big Mom. Her power was really interesting. She is also terrifying in how she can kind of flip a switch, and she can go from just seemingly happy to terrible and terrifying. I don't think she quite hits the Doflamingo level of terror, but she still adds a lot of value to this arc, and I think I'm really excited to see what she does moving forward. It's pretty incredible that she, Luffy hasn't even fought her really yet, and so she's insanely strong. I think the power and kind of the hierarchy of her and all of her kids, and how she's just sleeping with an insane amount of men, and she's been having kids for 40 years, is pretty interesting. And that was one of the more interesting things to unravel throughout this arc, was how she is taking their life force away and putting it into other things to create this paradise. Just another example of we go to a place and there's a false leader there who is clearly corrupt, and how you see it on the larger level of the Celestial Dragons and the world government being corrupt. But then you go to individual places and you have Doflamingo, and now you have Big Mom, who are these seemingly are really good people, and you think, oh, they've brought salvation to this place, or they've created this beautiful kingdom in Whole Cake Island, no one can ever starve here, things like that. But then you kind of, when you look into it, it's okay, Big Mom has a lot of issues, and there's a lot of corruption in this place. You can't leave, and so it's obviously not kind of a real place you would want to ever stay, to be honest. And you kind of unravel all of the everything with Big Mom and all of the corruption. I really liked her power and her backstory. It should stop. I need to stop being surprised at when Oda introduces a character, gives them a sad backstory, and so I hate them, and then all of a sudden I understand them so well. And And Big Mom has another example of a really great backstory, and I want to learn more about her in the future. I want to learn more about, not from when she was a kid, but kind of as an adult, how she started, creating this family and started really shaping her beliefs and how she wants to be a pirate, and her interactions with Kaido and her interactions with Goldie Roger back in the day, and Whitebeard. I want to see kind of more about her. But I really liked her role in the story. And another cool little thing is, like, when she loses a lot of the weight at the end of the arc, when she gets so hungry, it's just kind of cool to see, like, we always see, and it's like, oh, like a joke, it's a very cartoony thing of, like, Luffy when he eats food and then his tooth gets healed. And then but you see that not only in, like, the main characters, but you also see it in one of the biggest villains. And so it's just like the food trope can get kind of old of, like, okay, this person eats a lot and that gives them all the strength. Like, I get it, but it was kind of nice to see it, like, used in an antagonist. And so it's like everyone eats a lot because they need to get this energy. It's not just Luffy. So that was a cool little addition that I liked about Big Mom. And then, of course, you have the other main villain of Whole Cake Island, which is Katakuri. And I love Katakuri, to be honest. He is awesome. And as the big boss, really, like, Big Mom was kind of separate in this arc. And I really liked how the final fight between Katakuri and Luffy was staged, because there is always the issue of, in other arcs, in Dressrosa, one of my issues at the end of it was, I loved the fight between Doflamingo and Luffy, but the other side fights were not as interesting. They didn't hold the same weight, because you knew if they beat Doflamingo, everyone's going to be saved. If they lose to Doflamingo, it doesn't matter. And that can be an issue throughout a lot of the series, and even when I got to, like, Water 7, it was kind of the inverse of that, where I was weirdly really interested in, like, what Robin was doing, and the fight between, like, Zoro, Usopp, Sanji, and, like, Kaku. For me, the Lucci fight was interesting, but I wasn't actually as interested in it as the side fights, which is kind of the only example of that, I think, so far in the series. But in this fight, I was heavily invested in Luffy versus Katakuri, but because Big Mom is obviously stronger than Katakuri, and is just way stronger than literally every other person on Whole Cake Island, that the fact that she is on a rampage and going after the other Straw Hats, there's this immediate threat where it's like, if Luffy wins, they could still lose. Like, even if Luffy beats Katakuri and he comes out of the mirror world, all of a sudden Big Mom could just slaughter them all. So it kept the tension, when you're cutting from battle to battle, really high, because you had Katakuri, who is insanely strong and just beating up Luffy, but then you also have Big Mom going after everyone and kind of just destroying all of the islands looking for this cake. And you had the awesome moment of Sanji cooking the cake, which is just, incredible. It's really cool to see him. And he has this smile, and he's like, oh, I just want to see Big Mom's face when she eats this. Like, oh, what a great moment for Sanji. Of course, this arc is prime if you're a Sanji fan, and I probably like it more than I should because I love Sanji. But yeah, so that tension, keeping it at the same level makes cutting from fight to fight way more smooth, because the tension and kind of the stakes are all at a similar level. It's not like, okay, this side fight, if Nami could, lose a battle and then it won't really matter because Luffy's gonna win the big day and that other guy isn't gonna matter. No, if you lose to Big Mom, Luffy's not gonna come and save you. Big Mom's that strong. So I really liked that about the final fight, and I liked how Katakuri was this kind of great match for Luffy, and his devil fruit power is really interesting, and he has the great moment where he lays on his back and he's eating the food, and kind of his relationship with his siblings, and kind of giving you a view into how Big Mom is as like a parent figure, and how Big Mom is as a parent, not only as a crew, the captain of a crew. And it kind of brings up these really interesting ideas, because you know that Katakuri is kind of this sad character who's put on this persona of being the perfect person, the person who never loses. And even though some of his siblings probably can see through the act, a lot of the people just praise Katakuri, and then when Katakuri isn't that ideal image in the fight between Luffy, they all just abandon him immediately, and they're like, this can't be our brother. And you know that Katakuri was forced this way, not only because of how he looked and things like that, which is also just like really sad and depressing, but also because of how Big Mom is as a leader. And, you know, bringing up a ruthless, you know, kind of billion-berry bounty type of person in her crew so she can compete with the best, you know, so she can be one of the emperors and she can compete with Whitebeard and Shanks and Kaido. You know, and seeing the hierarchy of Big Mom's family made me think of Whitebeard's family and how he creates like this family bond between his crewmates, and how, you know, the inner workings of when Whitebeard was around with Marco and Ace, how all of that would have worked, and kind of getting a glimpse into, you know, a potentially kind of corrupt side of where like Pudding is kind of, you know, been scoffed at as being ugly because of her third eye, and then Sanji has a moment where he says, "What a beautiful eye." So you have that moment, and then you have Katakuri, who's kind of sacrificed his image to be this ruthless killer who never loses. And you see kind of the pride in fighting that he gets when he fights someone who's on his level, but also is not willing to go down. And that fight also brings out the best in Luffy. I think it works really well in seeing kind of the evolution of Gear 4, seeing observation haki pushed to its limits was really cool. I really liked Katakuri, and actually my video for next week, my One Piece vlog for next week, will be a video discussing Katakuri as a villain. I think there's a lot to talk about there, which is more than just like a review's perspective on it, but I think Katakuri fits the story really well. I like his perspective on, you know, not only as a high up in the crew, but also in Big Mom's family, so I think that's really interesting, and showing the perseverance of Luffy and the respect he shows for Luffy at the end. I'm really curious to see what role is Katakuri gonna play later on in the story. You know, how angry is Big Mom gonna be with Katakuri, if at all? So I'm really excited to see kind of how that's gonna play out in the future, but I thought he fit this story really well, and I really think Whole Cake Island, you know, it's this like, it's one of the more tightly woven stories. You know, even Dressrosa can, as well as Doflamingo is as a character, to kind of hold everything together, it can kind of be a little all over the place at times. And this story, you know, at least thematically and its ideas, and how, you know, it has Sanji's backstory on an island that's ironic because it's food and like things like that. There's a ton of little things like that throughout the arc that just little added layers to make it, to add some depth to Whole Cake Island. And I really like what it means for Luffy. Luffy has the moment with Sanji, of course, when he fights him, and then Luffy goes back after he breaks out of prison, and he's drained. There's nothing, you know, he's like starving to death almost after like a day or two, or however long it is. And then Sanji shows up again with the basket of food that's soaked, and then gives it to him, and Luffy loves it. And Sanji, it's a moment where he gets back in the crew, and it shows Luffy's perseverance. But you know, that moment actually has, you know, multiple layers of like foreshadowing and payoff all at once, because you have kind of the allusion to Usopp fighting Luffy and Sanji apologizing by bringing him food. You obviously have the payoff of Sanji's backstory in that moment, with him bringing food to his mom that got soaking wet, and then of course him bringing food to Luffy that's soaking wet, and they both say, "Oh, it's so good," even though he knows it's not, at least up to the level of his cooking. Then you also have, you know, Luffy, you know, being so hungry and being so depleted. You see that later on in the story with Big Mom, and then you also see Luffy just take an absolute beating against Katakuri later on, and at this moment Luffy's been beaten and broken, but he still keeps going, he still keeps persevering. So there's a really cool payoff and foreshadowing for the arc right in that moment, which makes it really impactful. Another, you know, moment that sticks out to me out of all the moments, great moments in One Piece. There's multiple Sanji moments that stick out to me out of all of One Piece right in this arc. And then you also have the fight with Katakuri, which I think is one of the better fights in One Piece. However, if I did have one complaint, and I do think there is one aspect that holds this arc back from being a slam dunk 10 out of 10, one of the greatest arcs ever, I still think, you know, it scratched the surface of Marineford, but it didn't quite get there. And that's really because a lot of Big Mom's kids, as interesting as the idea behind her family is, there is so many children that is introduced all the time, and my head was just spinning often because the only one that really stood out to me was really Katakuri. He was way more interesting, and obviously he gets way more screen time than the rest, or time on the page. There's so many characters that are introduced that I just didn't care about, and even though there was a lot of characters introduced in Dressrosa, the vast majority of them I at least found interesting. But in this arc, I really only found Katakuri interesting as like the Whole Cake Island natives, besides Pudding. I think Pudding was pretty interesting in her flip from, like, I liked her, I hated her, I liked her again, and kind of that sad moment again with Sanji when she kisses him and takes away his memory of that kiss at the end. I'm sure she's going to come back in the story in an interesting way. And the Vinsmokes were interesting, but like just a lot of Big Mom's kids. They didn't have that much to do. I didn't really like the first kid at all, to be honest. He was just a super throwaway, I thought. And I also didn't like some of the guy who kills Lola's dad. I can't even remember his name because I found him just way less interesting than Katakuri. So there's just a lot of characters that were introduced that really expanded this arc when I feel like they were just kind of like unnecessary, or they just didn't get enough screen time. Like, I would have been totally fine if they would have explored these characters more, given us a little more about them, and I think that could have lifted this arc onto the level of Marineford, but kind of right now I think it holds it back overall. But that's really my only criticism of Whole Cake Island. I think it's absolutely incredible. Another character that I think fits the arc really well is the Worst Generation's Capone. Going into Whole Cake Island, I hated him because he kidnapped my favorite character and he was just on Big Mom's side, and I was like, who is this guy? And for him to start off on that bad of a note of me just like thinking he's a flat out villain, to him at the end of the arc being really likable, showing how much he cares about his family, another layer into the Big Mom family, and kind of just making me think about how pirate crews function as families, and potentially pirate crews that seem awesome might not be. I would be really curious to see if we learn more about Whitebeard, if he is the gracious kind of ruler that we think he is, or if he's actually like not quite as good and there were some problems. Obviously, probably a little bit of both, I would think. But I really liked Capone. He was awesome, and I didn't expect to like him so much. And then, of course, kind of the last thing that you have to talk about is the Vinsmoke family. I think they're all pretty interesting. I really like the designs. I liked Sanji's sister a lot. How could you not like Sanji's sister? She's just the only one who's nice to Sanji. I kind of wish we could have gotten more of Sanji just like kicking their ass. I wanted Sanji to beat up his family, but it seems like we got a long way to go before that actually becomes a reality. But overall, I really, really enjoyed Whole Cake Island. I think it's one of the better arcs in One Piece. I really love everything that it does with Sanji, and it just solidifies Sanji as my favorite character. It has some of the best fights, some of the most emotional moments. There's a few points where it might drag a little bit, but it also has the really unique assassination plot, which I really, really enjoyed. So overall, I definitely like Whole Cake Island, and I would give it a 9 out of 10. I think it's a step behind Marineford and Dressrosa, kind of on the same playing field as the Water 7 saga. We'll see what I think of it, once I get some time to sit on it, because it feels like all these new arcs, there might be a little bit of recency bias in me being like, oh my god, this is the greatest thing ever because I just read it. But everything with Sanji is absolutely incredible. The fight with Katakuri is awesome. I love the world building of Whole Cake Island. And at the end, we got to see Luffy's bounty, so I'm a little bit into the process of Wano, and this is kind of one of the last things I read, which is a few chapters, I think, after Whole Cake, is Luffy's bounty is up to 1.5 billion berries. He has a bigger bounty than Katakuri, and that is just... it is so satisfying to see Luffy's bounty go up, and he deserves it. And obviously now with his bounty, he is also the 5th Emperor of the Sea, which is really incredible. I've talked multiple times how I think he is putting himself in position to be one of the 4 emperors, and they kind of made like an extra spot for him for the 5th. Obviously, it seems like he's still quite a bit weaker than the other 4, so he still has a long way to go, but it seems like his observation haki is on the path to getting somewhere somewhere maybe near Katakuri's, and he has a long way to go to use his Conqueror's Haki to kind of max that out. And I think he's going to be able to use his rubber ability in a lot more unique ways, taking on how Katakuri was able to do tons of unique things with his Mochi Mochi ability, and of course Doflamingo with his string ability. So I'm curious to see how Luffy's power evolves in Wano. I'm excited to get back and see Zoro and Robin and kind of the rest of the crew, and of course see some more Law. And I've heard a lot of hype about Wano, and I'm so close. I'm in the final. I'm within 100 chapters of catching up. I cannot wait to catch up to One Piece. Whole Cake Island was awesome, and like I said, I think Oda in a lot of aspects gets better and better as he's been creating, and even though some arcs are on a similar playing field overall as older arcs, I'm still having just a blast reading it. And I think Whole Cake Island is one of the most emotional peaks that we've seen in the story, and I want to see more from potentially other backstories of the Straw Hat crew. So yeah, I loved Whole Cake Island. Let me know, where does Whole Cake Island kind of rank in your hierarchy? Make sure you follow me on Twitter at ArtEssays. I did a poll a few weeks ago of kind of what everyone thought of Whole Cake Island, and most people said it was a good to great arc, with I think maybe 20-something% of people thinking it was average to bad. So overall, I think there might be a consensus that it's one of the better arcs in One Piece. But let me know what you think. I might just be coming high off of reading that fight between Luffy and Katakuri, and of course my love of Sanji. And next week there will be the video just about Katakuri, so make sure you stay tuned for that next Thursday. And I hope to see you guys in the next one.